Thanks for joining us for the Bible Journey Midweek Connect. My name is Mark Green, and I'm the pastor of adult ministries at Otterbein Church. Congratulations, you are halfway through your first week of reading through the Bible Journey. I want to encourage you to press on because there is some great stuff ahead in the book of Matthew. Just to catch us up, Matthew has given us the lineage of Jesus to demonstrate he is the promised Messiah. Then he walked us through the baptism and temptation of Jesus. And those are some great stories. And remember, Matthew is writing topically, not chronologically. So right after the temptation of Jesus, he brings us to the Sermon on the Mount. As you prepare to read this sermon, let me give you a couple things to watch out for. First, let's consider the word blessed. We're going to hit this word right away in the Beatitudes. Each of the Beatitudes begins with this wonderful word, and it has a rich Hebrew and Greek history behind it. The word literally means happy, or to count as happy or favored. Now, I realize that can cause a problem for some of us because we have decided we're not to be happy, but joyful. The word happy communicates the idea of feeling pleasure or enjoyment because of a favorable situation. Since God doesn't want his people to feel pleasure or enjoyment when favorable things happen, we feel compelled to substitute the word joy. Okay, that's a bit of sarcasm. God clearly desires for his people to feel pleasure when good things happen to them. In fact, I would suggest to you that we repeat things that make us happy and joyful. Think about how that applies to reading the Bible or prayer or serving Jesus. We repeat what we enjoy, what we find happiness in. But the biblical word is richer than just feeling happy. The root word means to go straight or to be successful. In the Bible, success and security are always connected to knowing God and obeying his ways. So the blessed person is both happy and joyful because they're experiencing success and security as the outcome of knowing and obeying God. They are favored by God and therefore experience a better life. Now, there's one more cool nuance to this word that's worth noting. The word conveys the idea of being envied. The blessed person has been approved by God and is thus envied by others because they handle life so much better than people who do not know God. Simply put, our life is better because it is honoring and pleasing to God when we respond in obedience to him, and he blesses us in return. Let me see if I can just sum all this up. That's a lot of ideas. Let me sum it up for you. To be blessed is to experience the favor or approval of God because you have chosen the path of knowing and obeying him, resulting in a deep sense of happiness and security. As a result, others envy your success. I hope that's both an encouragement as well as a way to examine your life to see how blessed you are. After the Beatitudes, Jesus launches into a series of short teachings on various subjects. One of the key verses to understanding Jesus' teaching is found in Matthew 5, verse 20. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You see, Jesus is introducing a new way to think about knowing and following God. The religious leaders had placed all the emphasis on rote obedience to both the law of God and all the traditions that they had added to that law. You see, these traditions were an attempt by the religious leaders to flesh out the law. For instance, the Torah said to rest on the Sabbath. So what does that mean? How do I know I am obeying that command? Well, what the religious leaders did was create a list of guidelines for what constituted rest and what constituted work. Now, in and of itself, this is not a bad idea. Wanting to know specifically how to obey God is a good thing. The problem was that these additions became a club for judging others and a tool to proclaim yourself as better than them. The teachings of the religious leaders are then going to come into conflict with the teaching of Jesus. This is why you see this repeated phrase, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." Jesus takes the teaching of the religious leaders and shows that how they have misrepresented the Old Testament law. Then he's going to teach the true meaning of the law. He's going to emphasize that obedience is not just what you do, but the heart attitude that you do it with. It is a both and, not an either or. If obedience and love are not done in unison, then it is not true obedience. Jesus is going to challenge us to go beyond the minimum obedience to true obedience. Let me give you an example from Matthew 5:33 to 37. Let me read it for you. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn." But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of God, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than that comes from evil. So here's what the Scribes and Pharisees had done to twist the truth of what God had said. Verse 33 is a combination of several Old Testament verses concerning making vows and speaking truth. Basically, the Pharisees are saying is that you should honor your word. If you make a commitment or a promise, you should do what you say. Hey, no disagreement there. Everyone, including Jesus, agrees that we should not swear falsely. We can all agree that as followers of Jesus, we should be people whose words count and who tell the truth and who honor their word. So what's the problem? Well, in order to provide some wiggle room, the Pharisees developed a formula for when you had to honor your word and when you did not have to honor your word. If you made a vow or promise using a certain formula, you were obligated to do what you said. But other formulas allowed some wiggle room. They were not so binding. The idea behind what the Pharisees were doing was that if God's name was used, God became a partner in the transaction, and therefore you must honor what you said. But if you did not use God's name, then you had nothing to do, and God had nothing to do with the deal. Honoring your word was now at your own personal discretion. Basically, what they did was remove personal integrity and holiness from the equation, and they made telling the truth nothing more than a manipulative formula at the discretion of the speaker. In addition, they violated the third commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. That's just one example of how the Pharisees were twisting God's law to satisfy their own desire for external obedience at the expense of heart obedience. As you read this week, expect to feel some conviction. The teachings of Christ have a way of piercing our heart and speaking to our soul. Don't run from that, but embrace it. If you do, I think not only will you experience Christ more deeply, but you will discover the joy of walking in righteousness throughout your day. And guess what? God will bless you for that, and you will find much joy. Well, that's it for today. May you find joy in the journey of reading the Bible.